Good morning, Year 12. Welcome back to our last two lessons of attachment. So I hope that you're understanding it okay. I'm going to set you a little bit of revision to do at the end before you do an attachment end of module assessment, just to check everything over. I really do advocate that you do your homework in time conditions. So you have all these on here, you've obviously got your notes. I would say 25 minutes maximum. See what you can do in time conditions without your notes. And if you want, you could put at the top how long it took you to do it without notes. And then just that practice of redoing it over and over again gives you that accurate description of a mark, is what I would say. So we are 2 lessons away from finishing. We'll do our end of module assessment, and then who knows where we'll be. Well, potentially you could be teaching yourself psychopathology, but I'll make sure that I put videos up as well, just to go through some stuff if you're not sure. I think the point of these videos, some of you might use them, some of you may never look at them, is, I know for me personally, hearing somebody talk about it and talk through something is much easier to understand than just sitting there writing notes. So all I would say is, in your 4 hours extra a week on psychology, make sure that you are revisiting old content. So memory, social influence, approaches a very, very long time ago, and obviously research methods being 30%. So make sure you keep embedding that, practicing those questions. You could do an hour on each of them a week, potentially, just to keep that interleaving, interbedding still present. So today what we're looking at is institutionalisation. So we're looking at Romanian orphans, quite an interesting niche area of attachment, and quite sad actually, some difficult studies that we're going to have a look at as well. But to begin on here, I've got a quick video for you to watch, so I'm not going to put that on there. You can watch that. That gives you a nice bit of a background from somebody who was a Romanian orphan. I'll explain what that means and some of the impacts that that's had on their lives. So the effects of institutionalisation, being in care homes, not really forming meaningful attachments. We've got key research that we need to look at here. The Rutter's ERA study and the Bucharest study. 2 that you need to know really well, because they might ask you some specific questions on them. A little bit of application, some funny application, and then some exam questions. But this section they love, because it is, the people easily mix up institutionalisation with maternal deprivation. And when asked of the effects of institutionalisation, they sort of just talk about research. But really, we want to know, what is the impact of being in an institution for a long period of time? Okay, so that will all become clear in a minute. So a little bit of context as to why we're focusing on Romanian orphans specifically. So in Romania, there was a massive problem with orphans and orphanages, because there was a communist ruler, Nicolae I can never say it, Ceausescu, something like that, who banned abortion. So he wanted families to have lots and lots of children, denied them access to contraception. There was lots of food shortages, energy shortages. That's a really hard word to say, shortages. There was a lot going on, but there was no contraception. They had to keep these children. But obviously, if they've got a lot of people fighting for resources and quite a few people in unemployment, many of the Romanians had to abandon their children, leaving them in underfunded, state-run orphanages. Okay, and I've got some horrible pictures to show you, just to give you a bit of an insight as to how disgusting they were. So many psychologists have used this to look at the long-term effects of deprivation. Think back what deprivation was. What did it mean? So some questions there you can discuss with yourself or your dog. What do we know about attachment already, and how could this help us predict the outcome? How might the orphans behave? What could be some of the things that we picked up last time that they might suffer from? And then have we got any problems with studying orphans in terms of things like generalisation, ethical issues? Is there anything we can pick out? So have a think about that. One thing I've put in the folder as well, which I can't remember if I've shown you, I don't think I have, is the case of Jeannie Wiley. You might have seen a documentary on her. There's a few on YouTube, which I do recommend you watching. They are incredibly interesting. So you've got a little video there you can watch of her. And one method that is used to study the effects are looking at individual cases. So case studies are really useful because they give us an insight that we wouldn't usually have, but generalization is obviously really poor. So I'll give you a quick background on Jeannie Wiley. You can use her. She was kept in a room from birth until the age of 10. She was chained to a potty and she was kept in this room with no light, no interaction from her parents. They just sort of gave her things like dog food to eat and just sort of left her chained in this room. So she had no chance to develop any language skills, any cognitive development, any social skills. So have a read of it. Some questions that you can answer there that I think I've attached as a Word document, but you can make notes from the video. It's very shocking, but for us, it's really interesting because we can pick out how important attachment figures are for development. Okay, let's have a little look at Jeannie. Then some key things that you find. She was discovered at 12 and a half. She was isolated. Physically, she couldn't swallow properly. She never learnt that. She was drooling, had the mental age of an 18-month-old. And the care afterwards, she had a care worker that was assigned to her 5 days a week with her. And over time, her language improved. So she's quite a useful study, quite a useful case in how actually aftercare is phenomenally important for development, which we looked at in maternal deprivation. If you have loving parents who you are fostered by or adopted by, then some of those elements can be reversed, which is something to think about. So, Victoria Speaker there. Institutionalizations, if we had to define it, which you'd want to in an essay, the effects of living in an institutional setting. So things like a hospital, an orphanage, a children's home, where they live for a long, continuous period of time, and there's little emotional care. Now it's better, but in the past, barely any emotional care provided. So what's the difference between this and being cared for by a family? Well, it's going to be obvious, isn't it? Institutional care, there isn't an attachment figure that you connect with. Less sociable, aggressive, probably at the situation and at yourself. Less intelligent, not really cared for very well. Whereas in a family, stability care, more sociable, and you have that emotional connection with somebody, which one of the best things that has come from looking at research into orphans is that now we have key workers. So even at school, if you have an educational healthcare plan, whether you are deemed as a vulnerable child or you have special needs or difficulties, you have a key worker who is assigned to you in the school that you can go to if you have any issues. They oversee your school development. That's kind of come from this research, which is quite interesting. So some horrible pictures now from the orphanages. So they were very underfunded because they were sort of like the neglected children from unwanted homes. A bit like the China's one-child policy, sort of just left to their own devices. So not cared for properly, lacked basic nutrition, subject to abuse, some of them 3 or 4 sharing a bed, fleas and rats, not given the correct bedding, chained, some of them, really poor management of the property. And when they turned 18, they just kicked out. There was nothing, no aftercare for them. nowhere they could really go to better themselves, really. They were just sort of housed there for a bit, if you can call it that, and then left. So 2 key bits of research that we need for this section, which I've attached on Show My Homework, but it's also in the book as well, is the ERA study and the Bucharest Early Intervention. The ERA study, actually, one of the key researchers went to my university and was one of my professors for child development. What a nerd. Lovely person. Yeah, really great. Had a real interest. And one of my friends actually did her dissertation on the Romanian orphans, like a follow-up study, which is quite interesting if you're a major geek like me. So have a read of the information and make some notes. Pause this now and do that. And then for a little extension, how would you summarise them into just the key bits of information that you need? So pause that and do that now. And then we'll come back together and discuss it. So very, very brief, this would have been a quick quiz. ERA and Bucharest studies, what have we got? So what does the ERA stand for? It's the English and Romanian Adoptees Research. Disinhibited attachment. Now, if we think back to The Strange Situation and Ainsworth, she only classified 3 attachment types, whereas here we've discovered a 4th. So quite a nice crossover is that you can, if you're talking about Ainsworth, you can say actually a negative is that we have this new attachment type that was never discovered at the time. So could those attachment types potentially lack internal validity and temporal validity? Potentially, yes. So disinhibited is a form of insecure attachment. They don't discriminate between attachment figures, so they're quite overly clingy to anybody, and sometimes quite overly sexualized to anybody that they come across, because they've never developed a normal attachment type. By what age have the children caught up with their British counterparts? So some age of 4, some age of 10, outside the critical period. So we have that sensitive period as an issue again. It questions the critical period because some of them are managing to change their development essentially over time with the correct love and care. Zena et al., what did they find? Which method was used? So used a strange situation. Those in an institution, again, showed signs of disinhibited attachment. And then the 4 identified effects of institutionalisation. This is where some people go wrong and they just explain the studies instead of the effects. So physically, they're underdeveloped. Intellectually, they have a really low IQ. Classed as mentally retarded. Disinhibited attachment, and obviously they're suffering from poor parenting. So a little bit more on the effects then. Attachment disorder is a thing. It used to be sort of quite shadowy as to what that actually meant, but quite a few children that we have at school suffer from attachment disorder, usually those who are in foster care or in care homes. When they've, experienced disruption, it affects their development socially and emotionally, and there's no preferred attachment figure. We have children attached to teachers, to TAs, to other children. They can't distinguish between who is their main attachment figure because they just don't have one. Experiencing severe neglect or frequent change of caregiver. So if you're in a foster home, you're moving around constantly, so there isn't really a one primary caregiver that they have in their life. So that's why it's disinhibited. So 2 types of attachment disorder. So remember, we looked at the reactive inhibited attachment last time. So shy and withdrawn, can't cope with social situations. Disinhibited, they treat strangers with inappropriate familiarity, a lot of attention seeking. And then also the effects of mental retardation, having that incredibly low IQ. So they're functioning abnormally, pretty much. Okay, so there are our main effects. They're our go-to. And that's just a little key pointer, a little summary of what we've looked at so far. Okay, so the two studies there, the effects and what it actually is. So a couple of exam questions to have a go at then. You've got 5 evaluative statements. What do we think the Romanian orphan research is? Is it limited because it only looks at a few cases? Good because it's got a comparison group. Scientific because it shows cause and effect. Ethically questionable or useful because it shows long-term effects. That is a hard question for 2 marks because you could easily say that it's all of them. So have a think really carefully. Pause this now. What would you put? And then our answers are B and E. So B, because we look at those control groups, it makes it more scientific. And it's useful because so things like the Rutter study, it's longitudinal, we're looking at them over a long period of time, it's still going, we're still catching up with them, seeing how they're getting on. So it's long-term, not just short-term. A little bit of fun then, so a bit of application to Tracy Beaker. Have a watch of this. What effects can you see in the following scenes? And how far do you think the effects can be reversed? So have a think, how far can they be reversed? What I have got in that little pack for you is another question on Nadia. It's also in page 91 of your book. The more questions you practice and do, the better, especially for AO2. So please do pause this and do it. Then I've got another bit of research for you to have a look at. Gunnar's study, so a bit of an extension task really. If you're struggling with this section or not really sure, I advocate have a look at that. The more studies you have, the better. Then this is Nadia's question here. So if you're going to do the Nadia question, I would pause this, then compare it to the answer here. And then we'll move on to looking at some of the evaluation. So you can do this 2 ways. You can either stop this and create your own peel paragraphs. I would always recommend that because then you're practicing, you're linking back to the question, you're pushing it further with your so what's, your howevers. And then I've got very, very brief summary of some of the evaluation you could include here. So one of the best things, like I said earlier, is that it has really good real life application. So because of the Romanian orphan research, we now have key workers in institutional care. So we see them in school, but also in care homes as well. There is one specific person that every child has that they can go to, that is essentially their primary caregiver. So that's a real positive. In terms of extraneous variables, so extra things within the research that need to be controlled, we've got fewer of those than other orphan studies, which means that it's increasing the validity, as most of the orphans have been abandoned as a result of this new law. So we haven't got confounding variables like, they had to be put into care because of bereavement or neglect. So most of the time it's due to this one factor, which is really important. But it's not 100% confounding variable free. So in the ERA, we have children who were chosen to be adopted. They might be more sociable, more outgoing, made more of an effort. So that is a massive confounding variable. So they're kind of maybe putting themselves forward to be adopted compared to the others. So that's a problem there. The Romanian orphanages were particularly poor, so we've got low levels of intellectual stimulation, fewer relationships formed. That can't be generalised to every orphanage. Every institution. God, I am tired. Because we can't generalise it. Some are more intellectually poor than others. Not all of them who experience this privation also show disinhibited attachment. So a third of them recovered really well. A privation alone can't explain these negative outcomes. There has to be something else that could have explained it. Can't be certain that the children studied had failed to form attachments. How do we know that they never formed an attachment? It could be they had that they had, and later issues were due to other factors like feelings of rejections. We can't be very specific. And then obviously we don't know to what extent the effects of privation extend into adult life. So the last assessment was 16 years. There hasn't been one since. So it could be that children who fail to form attachments in early life can eventually recover. But there needs to be more research into that to guarantee it. So like I said, they love this section in attachment. And we're at the point now where we're talking about your exams and what could come up in the papers, because we don't know what would have come up this year. So for your 16 markers, like I've said to you before, planning is so important. If you run out of time, you run out of 25 minutes to do it, they have a plan, they can give you credit. So a good thing to do would be to practice creating a bullet point plan for this type of question. So it could be something like, discuss the effects of institutionalisation, referring to these studies in your answer. If you want to do that and send it to me, then do it. If you want to do a plan and send it to me, also fine. I find this section quite tricky because it's really easy to mix up the studies. It's really easy to mix up the key terms. So it might be something you want to spend a bit of time on doing. And that is institutionalisation. Okay, that's pretty much finished. So our last thing we need to look at is the impact of early life on adult relationships. That's quite a good little section. And then attachment is finished. So I will be setting you some revision. I want to see some evidence of I've seen evidence of your notes, which is great, but now I want to see evidence of revision. So make sure that, obviously we're not doing our big A3 sheets, but I want to see that you're still revisiting content. Okay, so I want some revision for attachment.